right, let's do this.
Jager, you're the CEO of Crunchbase. I assume everyone in this room has heard of Crunchbase. Hey guys, raise your hands if you've checked Crunchbase in the last week or so.
Yeah, love it.
All right, yeah, there we go.
Thank you very much.
So how long have you been running Crunchbase?
It's been about a year and a half. We spun out of America Online in 2015 in September, and that's when I joined.
Okay, and so for people who've been checking Crunchbase for years, what would you say is like the focus or the mission for Crunchbase in the Jager era?
Yeah, I love that. So right now we are sort of the master record of startups, and all of the people associated with startups, so investors, the companies that acquire them. As we kind of look to the future, it's can we become the master record of companies? Can we be that LinkedIn for companies, the place that you're always going to go to find companies for whatever purposes you have, whether it be investing or where you want to work, but maybe it's also where you want to go and sell to, maybe who you want to partner with. And that brings a whole new challenge, like a whole set of challenges that we need to sort of circumvent and get through to become that master record.
When you joined Crunchbase, was there anything about the data set that you guys have or just sort of what's really happening behind the scenes that was really surprising, even for someone who was trying to get to know the company from the outside? Because obviously we all do check Crunchbase impulsively, but we maybe don't know exactly what is available there.
For sure. So when I joined, Crunchbase was really a lookup tool. So you can go and do searches based on the names that you know, the companies that you know. You'd have to know what you're kind of looking for before you use Crunchbase. When I walked in the door, it became really obvious that there was a lot of latent value just hiding behind the scenes. You could see trends. You can see what was happening in certain industries, what was happening with employee moves, and who's doing what, our company's growing, shrinking. All that data is just hiding underneath the surface of Crunchbase. So one of the missions that I thought we
Which one of us is that?
I know.
It's probably me.
I'm doing all right? All right, good. One of the missions was, let's go and unlock some of that latent stuff that's hiding underneath it, that value to our actual users who can go and say, how is investment in Bitcoin changing over time? That was stuff that was really easy for us that our users couldn't do, and that was kind of the eye-opening stuff that I found when I joined.
So, at its core, when we're going to Crunchbase, do you find that people are usually going to be checking a specific company, or are they looking to learn really quick about a sector? Like as a reporter, we have to fake that we know what's going on all the time.
Right.
So I might be checking Crunchbase, right before a meeting with a VR company to try to learn as much about what happened in VR investment in the past year as possible. And I probably don't fool anybody, but at least I try.
Right.
What do you see people mainly going to the site for right now?
Sure. So certainly when we spun out, it was about, again, lookup. Now, I would say probably half of our traffic are people doing research, trying to figure things out. So we have a new search tool. That search tool allows you to go and say, show me what's happening in a certain industry. And that is, again, probably half of our search traffic now. There's 30 million users using Crunchbase. A huge percentage of them are doing sort of fundamental, basic research now.
So what's the coolest thing that you've looked up lately? What have you seen on your own site?
Yeah, sure. So when you think about what happened in Q1, we actually just raised funding. So we just raised our B. So I was doing a lot of research on kind of what was happening with funding to do that. And it was really obvious that Q1, we recovered from Q4. So Q4 was pretty awful. It was down about $8 billion of sort of standard investment globally. And in Q1, we recovered. But if you kind of double click on the recovery, you'll find that a lot of the investment is going internationally now. Mm-hmm. So if you look at just Silicon Valley itself, there's still a really dramatic decrease in how much funding is going into Silicon Valley, but you'll see a dramatic increase in geos like China and Beijing. That tripled from 8 billion to 6 billion to 18 billion in the last year. Like that's a dramatic increase when the total global funding is sort of a pretty small fraction of that. Like it's a huge part of that funding that went to China, and that almost directly came out of Silicon Valley. So in that same period, we saw about a $7 billion decrease in funding from Silicon Valley. So that was an interesting thing that I found. And the sort of Series A, Series B, Series C those funding rounds are decreasing, but the sizes of them are increasing. So the dollars coming out are being more sort of cautiously spent. But when they find a winner, they're trying to invest more heavily in those winners.
So fewer companies after the Series A are getting funded right now than what you saw when you joined?
That's right.
Okay. And how much of a lag would you say there is between the data that you guys are able to crunch, pun intended, and yeah, God, it's right before lunch. No, but what's the lag between the data that you guys can process and what you think actually would be relevant to entrepreneurs in the audience who might be wanting to adapt their strategy to the trends that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think the data that entrepreneurs typically want are who are the investors who are investing in my sector, at what rate, most recently, who's investing in my competitors, that sort of stuff. That's pretty real time. So one of the joys of Crunchbase is you hear about a funding round, it's usually in Crunchbase immediately afterwards. So that is where we're very, very strong. One of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize is that funding rounds don't always get announced. So sometimes we'll have a trickle effect. A good, I want to say half of our funding comes in after the fact, and every quarter it's basically 25% of that remaining half gets into Crunchbase. So we might not hear about a funding round, especially the Series C and Series A, for a good 6 months to a year, because that's, if you keep it private, there's no way for us to know about it.
So last year I wrote an article about a startup that I thought was really interesting taking on MixPanel called Heap. They were backed by NEA and I think Menlo Ventures.
We're a customer.
Okay, so yeah, cool company.
Yeah.
And I think they just raised their A. And I'm talking to them, and I'm like, okay, why raise this money right now? And the founder kind of like laughed at me, and I was wondering why. And he goes, well, we raised this money 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And I found that amazing. And I said, why are we talking right now if you raised this money 6 months ago? And he goes, we were busy.
Yeah.
We didn't think that press mattered, or we didn't think people needed to know about the funding.
Right.
Why do you see that hurting companies in any way, or do you see any change in sort of how companies think about announcing and putting out their funding to the world?
Yeah, it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. In Heap's case, actually, I don't know Heap's case, but sometimes you want to be stealth, and it's actually, you don't want your competitors to know that you have this unfair advantage right now, so you might keep it secret for a while. It's usually a good idea to be public about it, because you do often get press, especially at the Series B, Series C, Series D level. You want to get it out there. You want people to know that you are thriving. It's a good recruitment tool, honestly, if you're thinking about how to get people to come and work at your company. Seeing that you have gotten to that next level is a huge recruiting benefit. So that's typically why people will be pretty forthcoming about their funding rounds. But there are exceptions to that rule, one of which is it can get distracting if you're blowing up.
What about the sense of just like fatigue or dilution? Like, I don't know how many people in this room have tried to pitch the press recently or something like that, but it seems like, just in my experience at Forbes, Series A rounds happen so frequently that sort of none of them really necessarily resonate the way they might have a few years ago.
Yeah.
That there's sort of a saturation of funding news in the market. Now, all that funding news is ending up on Crunchbase. So what do you guys see there, and what would you advise for people who want to resonate?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get press super interested in your funding round unless something very unusual is happening. I'm sure you would attest to that. Crunchbase is a good way to announce it in a lot of ways, because we do highlight Series A companies all the time. We've got a newsletter where we go and talk about them. We'll put them as featured funding if it's usually a Series A or higher. So we are a good vehicle that if you can't get press talking about your stuff, maybe we're a way to get it done. And the nice thing about that is when you enter in your Series A funding round in a Crunchbase, there is this whole series of investors who want to invest in Series Bs who are looking at for a funnel, right? And now your company fits a certain set of criteria. They now are going to find you. They're probably going to reach out to you and maybe start a dialogue because they want to see if you're someone that they want to invest in if you get to the next level.
So how good would you say, what grade would you give the accuracy of the data on Crunchbase?
Yeah, I mean, at spin out, I would give us like a C, honestly. Like we had a lot of things we had to do when we first spun out. Now, a year and a half later, I'd give us probably a B, B+. I think any data provider in the world is gonna, if they say they're an A, they're lying. Like there's just no way to be perfect at data. So the thought is, let's go and improve how we collect data, It's not just community focused. Let's go and find other ways of getting data in and validating our data to get that grade higher and higher. We have a lot of internal metrics on how we gauge and make sure that we have the highest possible quality data, because so many, not only of our users and our customers use our data, but we also have other services and software that's consuming our data and using it as their master record in their own software. So we have to be as good as we possibly can.
So the same people who check Crunchbase here, at this point, maybe are likely also checking another data provider.
Sure.
And there are several, some send very punchy, maybe like controversial email newsletters. Others are trying like big partnerships, but it seems like there's a thirst to take on Crunchbase as sort of the repository for startup funding data or just general data. How do you see Crunchbase differentiating, and also how would you rate their quality relative to you guys right now?
Sure, so it's a tricky question for me because I'm totally biased. But the reality is that many of those companies are customers of ours. So you might be surprised of the people that they say they're competitors of ours. Really, they might be already paying us to consume our data. So that is a important part of the story, is that we really feel like we are the primary source of this data, and other people who build value on top of our data set feel the same way, so they don't have to replicate it. There are also companies that scrape our data. We certainly have plenty of people scraping. There are whole services set up around just scraping our data and reselling it to other providers. That's illegal, but it is something that people can do. So the reality is I don't see any of those other folks as competitors, because I know that if they win and Crunchbase were to go away, they actually don't have the source of data, because they don't have the same data fees that we do. We've got hundreds of thousands of people contributing in funding data into our systems. We have, of course, we are the destination, so that's where people put the data in. We have 3,000 partnerships with VCs all over the world sending us their portfolio data directly. And those VCs don't want to have 5 different partnerships with companies like ours. They want to do it with the one primary source. And that means that we are the only ones that learn about that data. So the only way to get it is to scrape it from us, which is just part of the deal.
And so you had kind of learned a lot about sort of startup culture firsthand with Salesforce.
Yeah.
You guys also, Salesforce maybe is the master of marketing things before they fully exist.
Right.
So I'm curious, like, how has your experience, going from an executive at Salesforce to running Crunchbase maybe informed where you see Crunchbase going, and what cultural lesson from Salesforce kind of is top of mind as you try to take Crunchbase, forward now?
Sure. So maybe that's just worth me doing a little bit of a history lesson on me. So I was at a bunch of startups back until 2004, and that's when I joined Salesforce. And I was at Salesforce for about 11 years. It was a very long time. I joined when it was 400, 500 people, and I left when it was about 20,000. So I saw a lot of change in that process. When I left, I was the head of product of the core Salesforce automation product. So accounts, contacts, leads, opportunities, forecasting, territory management, all that sort of stuff that salespeople use were all in my product line. And so when I came to Crunchbase, my pitch, if you will, of trying to get that job was, you're not a data company. Like, we're actually, Crunchbase is an application company, and we are going to build applications in a way that no one has built applications before, where we think about our data as the primary value that we're extracting through these applications. Whereas Salesforce is empty when you get it, let's go and have Crunchbase have all this data filled in there, and let's go and essentially allow this data to be extracted out to our users in a new way that no one's really seen before. So that, like, the Salesforce education from my perspective on the product side was, can we go and build applications that had inherent value before I put anything into it, which is something that was a constant challenge that we had at Salesforce.
Now, when we think of like things that Crunchbase could do, or how you maybe actually apply that, like I'm trying to think what these apps would be. Maybe you could give us an example or two. But could a place like Crunchbase ever track companies by culture or by diversity? Like, could there be a scorecard that isn't just how much money you've raised and who invested in the company?
For sure. So this is what I was sort of saying, is like, how do you get to be that master record of companies? And this is actually some big changes that are happening later this year, where we have a choice. The choice is, do we go and try to find all that data? That's an example. Maybe you care about website traffic or tech stack or how many patents they have or what jobs they have open. All of those different things are slivers of what a company is. How do we go and get all of that data? And we could go and just try to crawl it and find it, but the reality is that because we are a channel, because we have all these users, we're able to go and form partnerships with lots of different data providers. So we're launching this thing called Crunchbase Marketplace there this year, and essentially as a user, you're going to be able to say, look, I'm looking for a job. I want to know who got funded, sure, but do they have back-end engineering jobs available too? Like, that's interesting for me. Or maybe I'm a salesperson. I like to find companies that maybe just got funded, but also that they run on AWS, or they have a certain amount of website traffic, because I run Heap, and I want to go and have insights into how much traffic they have. So let's combine lots of these data sources into one thing. And the way we're able to do that is actually a lesson I learned at Salesforce, which was build a platform. Build a platform that can handle and customize and be whatever you need it to be, whatever our users need it to be, and bring that to them and say, now we have this app exchange of data, if you will, which allows you to go and choose the things that you want as part of your Crunchbase experience. And that's not just, let's talk about startups. Now no one cares about who invested in Bayer Corporation in the 1800s, but let's go and have all this data around every company in the world. And that's something that just doesn't exist today. And I think our users, we hear this all the time, I wish you had a lot more companies. It's not just about startups. I want companies everywhere in every geo. And that's the sort of stuff that we're bringing to the table.
So if I'm a company that's doing things the right way, let's say I'm ahead of the sort of woeful industry averages in diversity, would I get some sort of badge of recognition theoretically on Crunchbase? Like, how do I avoid being just company 5,000 that has raised between $2 and $7 million?
Yeah. So this is one of our plans is to go and have a deeper engagement with the companies themselves. Because we think it is important that companies engage and sort of highlight their strengths and let people know about what they're doing that's exciting. That diversity thing is a particularly challenging problem because you need to know the genders of employees to do that correctly, certainly from an automated standpoint. So that's another good place where maybe we would partner rather than trying to solve that challenge. We do track gender information on founders. So I can tell you, for instance, that of the companies that started last year, about 17% of them had female founders.
How would 17% having a female founder compare to a couple of years ago?
It's actually pretty terrible, if you want to know the truth. From 2012, don't totally quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure it's 2012 to 2017, it's been consistently 17% of new companies have female founders. Whereas if you look at 2009 to 2012, it almost doubled. It went from 9% to something like 17%. So that trend of it increasing, which was great from 2009 to 2012, flatlined in 2012 to 2000 and now. And that is not awesome. So obviously you'd expect that to continue. I don't have a good answer as to why it flatlined, but it did. And I think that's something that we should all be paying attention to. And I mean, obviously there's tons of, like, when you talk about diversity and Salesforce as an example, again, is doing a lot to improve their culture by trying to normalize the discrepancies that they had there. Again, at Crunchbase, we're at almost 50% women in our company, which I think is pretty awesome. That's a goal that we had when we spun out. So that is something that every company is struggling with, but it's on our community, the investor community, the startup community, to try to fix this wrong of 17%, because I don't think that's good enough, frankly.
So I think it was a year or two ago, one of the biggest venture capital firms, or just better known, First Round Capital, they scanned the data on every portfolio company they'd ever invested in. And they found pretty consistently that companies with a female co-founder outperformed the other companies. They were more likely to raise follow-on capital. They were more likely to survive. You guys can theoretically slice your data to see who gets follow-on funding, who kind of keeps signaling that they're doing well.
Right.
Have you guys been able to compare companies by their diversity or by sort of the amount of funding or just any sort of these metrics to kind of come up with a taxonomy of a healthy company today?
Yeah, I personally don't know them off the top of my head. I know we have done a lot of analysis here, so I know we just recently did an analysis on the percentage of partners who are women out of the top 100 VC firms. And again, like in your mind, like what do you think that percentage is of how many women are partners in the top 100 VC firms? If you guessed 7%, you would be right, and like that's not good, you know. And so we absolutely have that sort of number in the numbers in Crunchbase. And we have something called Crunchbase.news where we kind of do that analysis, and we'll go and post it out there and let people sort of see the discoveries that we're making on our own data set.
So yeah, I mean, we grapple with this. You know, I was introduced, I guess, as the editor of the Midas list, which, if you guys don't know, is the top 100 VCs by returns. And there were 6 women this year. Yeah. The year before, there were 5. If you spin it one way, that's the most ever. If you spin it the reasonable way, it's a woefully low number. Yeah. And that really upsets me. But then when I also am going by the returns, you have to ask, you know, okay, well, what changes first that is not the case? So I think if I'm a founder today, is there empathy at Crunchbase? Is there a way for a company to actually, you know, live as more than just a number and sort of a tag in this, I think, extremely crowded startup world today?
Yeah, you know, just being honest, there isn't. Like you can go and change the description, you can go and maybe put some of your culture and your words into how the company is being described, but there isn't a way really to get that empathy across. Like, we should say, is there a nonprofit here? Like, are they part of the 111 program? Are there things that they're doing to make the world better? I love that idea, so thank you for that. But it's not something that we do today, and maybe we should do in the future.
You can give me my commission when we go backstage.
I love that.
Is there any trend that you've seen take off just sort of at the 40,000-foot view, or any area that suddenly is popping up consistently on Crunchbase that is new or exciting for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, last year had a lot around AI. As you might imagine, you certainly are hearing a lot about AI today. I don't imagine that going away anytime soon. We did see sort of like the food delivery space kind of collapse throughout the end of last year. And when you're looking at what's happening now, having teams collaborate and working together, that is a space that has been hot in the past, and there's like this resurgence of VC going into sort of workplace collaboration. And
people trying to draft off of the Slack.
It's the Slack
success.
drag. That's right.
Okay.
So can I be a better Slack? Can I bring AI into Slack? You know, I think there's always this tendency to merge buzzwords together, trying to find the right combo. And I think workplace plus AI does some really cool stuff, and that's really what VCs are thinking about when they're investing right now.
All right, well, Jager, thanks so much for sharing these
My
insights
pleasure.
with us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. Thanks a lot.